Last game, Lions and Vikings.
And it's a doozy.
Vikings traveling to the Detroit Lions. And in case you live under a rock and are getting Wi-Fi for the first time watching this show, one, we appreciate the priority and loyalty. Two, there is everything on the line in this game. The winner of this game gets the number 1 overall seed in the NFC. They get to host throughout the playoff journey, and they get a bye week next week. The loser is in the wild card round and will not host a playoff game and probably won't host a playoff game at all throughout the playoffs. And so it is, the stakes could not be higher. No. Carmen, there's plenty to talk about in this game, but where does your mind go first?
Throw a dart. That's where my mind goes first. More than even the stakes in this matchup in general, and I have a whole article on foxsports.com, shameless plug, about just how rare this game is otherwise. Like, you're talking about the highest combined win total of 2 teams ever. And like the most since like the Patriots and the Giants in the 2007 season, I believe. You've got like the loss, whatever team loses will then set an NFL record for most wins by a 5, 6, or 7 seed in the NFL playoffs. There's so many of these kind of superlatives and things that you can go to with this game where both of these teams are going to make history regardless of the outcome. And so it's a wild matchup in every sense of the word. And I quite frankly have no idea where to go first. I mean, I think it has to have to do with the Detroit Lions defense and how banged up they are and how much is that going to matter, because you saw them give up that many yards, that many points to the San Francisco 49ers. Good news for the Detroit Lions. Linebacker Alex Anzalone returned to practice this week. I don't know if he's going to be available for this game against the Vikings, but this has been on the mind of both of these teams, more specifically the Lions, for the last 2 weeks, because that game against San Francisco did not mean anything, did not have any bearing on the stakes of this game. The Lions could have lost that game to the Niners, and it would not have mattered. It would have been the exact same situation for this Week 18 matchup. So that, to me, says that the Lions have been thinking about this game for 2 weeks versus just one, which the Vikings needed that win over the Packers to then compete with the Lions for the division, for the 1 seed, for all of that. So they had all that motivation against the Packers last week. It's so funny to me watching. I feel like there's a lot of discourse of like, should the Lions have played their starters against the Niners, and I never doubted it. And it wasn't just Dan Campbell being Dan Campbell. It was the intentionality behind the offensive scheme and the play calling by Ben Johnson. And something that he likes to do, and most coordinators do to some extent, is to try and set up future opponents by showing certain looks on the field and making them prepare as much as possible. And that was as evident as ever against the Niners. If you look at that Lions game and just what they were doing with their offensive line in particular, and Penei Sewell, which is only possible with a guy like Penei Sewell. But it's interesting to me because usually the defense in this situation has the upper hand when it comes to the offensive line, because you know who's going to be where at all times, right? Usually. The Lions have now set something up with Penei Sewell where he was going to the left side of the formation and he was acting in different ways, and he was lined up wide out there, and like that combined with all of this other stuff that they've done this season with him. If you see Penei Sewell out wide, that really doesn't give you any information as to what he's about to do, because he's done pretty much everything out of that alignment. So just things like that, I think, is a way of ensuring or protecting against the fact that they don't know how many points their defense is going to give up, especially to Sam Darnold, who has comparable numbers to MVP candidates right now, to Kevin O'Connell, who's a phenomenal play caller. Also, the offensive talent that exists on that roster, they are capable of scoring points and half. So, if you're the Detroit Lions, you know you're in for a dogfight. And now that we say that it's going to be a shootout, of course, it's going to be some sort of defensive battle somehow. But I do think that the Lions have done everything they can to insulate against their defense through no fault of their own, giving up some points, giving up some yards, doing all that kind of stuff. And they're going in there with the mindset that they're going to score as many points as possible. And that setup has started already and has for the last 2 weeks.
I think it's a great call out. I'm with you on the focus being on the Lions defensive injuries, and specifically at linebacker. Dalton Washington did a really good job talking about this on the review podcast that we did earlier this week. But just to echo some of his points, the linebacker matchup here for the Detroit Lions versus what the Vikings can do to attack linebackers, I think is going to be really important. Jack Campbell is basically the only scheduled starter who's still been out there, and even he has really struggled in coverage. And so they certainly need Alex Anzalone back, but they've struggled on the second level of their defense in coverage, really no matter who has been out there since a lot of these guys have started to go down. Jalen Reeves-Maybin was out there last week, and he struggled as well. 38.9 coverage grade for the Lions linebackers over the last month, 35.6 coverage grade versus play action. And we know that Kevin O'Connell is very willing to do things like pre-snap motion and play action and overloading just to put pressure on certain position groups. And so you know that he has this linebacker level of Detroit in his crosshairs. And I think because of that, the Vikings know they have a little bit of an advantage there, and it's just a matter of execution of whether or not they can really pull something off and really light up the scoreboard in that area of the field. My plus factor here for this one, I'm going to go with John Grenard, the edge rusher for the Minnesota Vikings. And the reason why is because I think that we look at this, the Lions offensive line, which is good. I don't want to say that they are not good and talented, but I think we believe that they are playing better than they really are, just because of the pedigree. The Lions offensive line, 20th in pressures allowed, 27th in total pressures allowed over the last month. Over the last month in that period of time, Penei Sewell, 13 pressures allowed, including 5 last week alone. Graham Glasnow, 14 pressures allowed over the last month. And so this is an area where the Lions offensive line is very talented, but they have not been as lights out of a unit over the last month as I think that we are just programmed to think that they are. And with a defense that is hyper aggressive, the way that Brian Flores is, this could be something that Jared Goff might be under pressure a lot more in this game than one would naturally think, just when we think about the Lions offensive line. So to me, John Grenard, who's had a 15.6 pass rush win percentage over the last month and has been their best pass rusher over the last month, he's going to play a key role to potentially get a lot of pressures against Jared Goff this upcoming Sunday.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, and I think that's a great call out in this for multiple reasons. And I think that the Lions are really good at self-scouting too, and I think they've gotten that memo, because if you look at this last game again against the San Francisco 49ers, 10 snaps with 6 or more linemen on the field, offensive linemen on the field. And you're like, Ben Johnson is not afraid to bring in extra guys to help out because of the fact that he can weaponize that creativity, and he does it so often, as I was talking about before. And when you have a guy like, you have Jonathan Grenard on the Vikings, but I think even more importantly is a guy like Andrew Van Ginkel, because of the fact that he can line up all over the defensive front, over the defensive formation in general. And he's a guy that Brian Flores really likes to utilize as far as just kind of creating these exotic looks and do all that kind of stuff. And I think that part of the reason why Ben Johnson has manipulated so many different offensive line looks on tape the last few weeks, it's leading up to this, because then if you're Brian Flores, it gives you more that you have to prepare for. You can't exactly sell out on certain matchups because you don't know if you're actually going to get them. All of that kind of stuff, I think, plays into the chess match between these two teams, which is why it's so much fun. Like, forget the stakes. This is just a fun game in general because of the coordinators that are going against each other on both sides of the ball, quite honestly. And I cannot wait. I could talk about this game. I could have spent the whole 2 hours, Trev, talking about this game because it's so much fun.
I can't wait to watch it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe the video. And if you don't have a PFF Plus subscription, you can get one to see all the premium stats that we talked about here on the show, plus the expert betting and fantasy advice over at subscribe.pff.com. The description is also right below. So if you are not a PFF Plus subscriber, you can become one today.